Welcome back. We're going to turn now to an exclusive conversation with one of the most well-known and at times polarizing political figures of our time, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Wow, look at this. It's like Conservative Party conference.
Johnson was in Ottawa earlier this week to speak at a conference put on by conservative think tank, the Canada Strong and Free Network. Despite resigning as Prime Minister in 2022 and completely stepping away from politics last year, Johnson continues to make headlines, most recently for his support for former U.S. President Donald Trump. In a January op-ed for the Daily Mail, Johnson responded to concerns over Trump's potential return to the White House, writing, quote, "A Trump presidency could be just what the world needs." But Johnson has also been a highly vocal supporter of Ukraine, and Trump staunchly opposes further U.S. aid for that country. So how does he reconcile those opposing views? And what does Johnson think about the political divisions here when it comes to climate change and the affordability crisis? I had the chance to speak with Mr. Johnson while he was in Ottawa. Have a listen to our conversation. Hi, Mr. Johnson. Pleasure to welcome you here to our studio.
Very good to see you.
Thank you very much for making the time.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
I wanted to start off on the issue of Ukraine because if I think back to the start of Russia's invasion and all the time since, you've been one of the most significant world leaders who has been expressing support for Ukraine's plight against Russia and really support for the idea of the West expressing support. Are you worried at this juncture about that support waning?
I've always been worried. If you remember how it started, the view of the West was that Putin was going to win in a matter of days. And that was the view of defense intelligence, both in London, I think here in Canada, in the US. That was totally wrong. And the Ukrainians were heroic, and they pushed Putin's troops out of the Kiev area. They pushed them right the way back. They've already regained more than half of the territory that Putin conquered. They've done huge damage to the Black Sea fleet, 40% incapacitated. They've done colossal damage to Putin's armed forces. They are going to win. But of course, it takes time, and it takes strategic patience on the part of us, Western partners and allies. And so, yeah, I'm worried, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that the Ukrainians can't win. I think they can. I think they will win.
Can they do it absent U.S. aid?
No. I think that they were able to do what they did because they were fighting for their hearths and their homes. But the story of the war over the last 2 years has been that, every time we think we've given them enough, it's proved incorrect. We need to keep giving more. We're always too slow to give them what they want. Right now, what they need is more long-range weaponry, ready to put Putin in jeopardy in Crimea, and they can do it.
I ask specifically about the absence of U.S. aid because of the fact that it's been stuck, essentially, for 6 months in congressional politics. You could call it that, I think. And there are, very few signs at this point in time that will change. Do you think you disagree?
I don't know if I'm so pessimistic about that. Well, because if you've seen what's happening in the last few weeks, this is a matter for U.S. Congress, it's a matter for them, but my impression is that there's a lot of support now in the Republican Party for treating this as the supplemental. The supplemental is the $60 billion, which is very important for Ukraine. Treating that as a loan, rather as the Americans did with Lend-Lease in the Second World War, a long-term soft loan. And I hope that in that guise it will pass. And some of the indications I've been getting recently is that it will go through. And people say, "Oh, what happens in the U.S. presidential election? Won't the rug be pulled out from under Ukraine? What if President Trump is re-elected?" I bet I anticipated your next question.
Not maybe a few from now, but yes.
But you know what? That's where people are going with this. And I don't think that any president of the United States, let alone a president who wants to make America great again, is going to want to start off by a new term by letting Putin win. No way.
I think what you wrote more recently was, "I simply cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukrainians." And I'm sure you would anticipate that I wonder how you've come to that assertion, given simply what he said. Stupid to send aid is what he said should be loans. Might encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want against NATO members who are not spending enough on defense. I mean, in past years, even he tried to block aid to Ukraine, because trying to tie it to his own political fortunes.
Couple of points there. First of all, my impression is, and I just said, I think that the 60 billion supplemental, with the encouragement of former President Trump, President Trump is going to go through as a loan. Number two, you'd say, look at what he says, not what he does. I think, well, if you look at what he does, don't forget which president of the United States was it that gave Ukraine those javelins. And I tell you something, in 2014, it wasn't when Putin actually invaded, it wasn't Donald Trump who was in the White House. It was Barack Obama with Joe as his vice president. And you look at what Trump did, it was actually very encouraging. So I'm hopeful, but I think possibly for what people at home are all thinking is, yeah, but this thing's been going on for 2 years. Maybe Putin is unbeatable. Maybe we should just, which I think is kind of the mood I want to combat, because it is fundamentally wrong.
Because you're a conservative, and that mood does exist in conservative political circles here in Canada and especially in the U.S.
Actually, let me give you the conservative reasons for wanting Putin ejected from Ukraine. Number one, if you're a conservative, you're a fiscal conservative, right? You believe in not wasting the taxpayer's dollar, whether it's American or Canadian or whatever. The best investment you can make in the long-term security of the Euro-Atlantic area, the cheapest investment you can make is helping the Ukrainians. You're saving money, you're saving trillions potentially of dollars over the long term. Number two, I would say that it's from a Canadian perspective, actually, I think you could argue that when you look at what's coming down the track, the melting of the ice in the Arctic, the tensions there between Russian ambitions and Canada's territory, you're going to want a sense that boundaries are going to be respected, that international law is respected. That's a strong defense of the nation. I think it's a strong conservative value. Third, freedom. Well, how about freedom? That's what we conservatives, I'm not saying you're a conservative, actually, but I'm talking about Canadian conservatives, British conservatives, American conservatives. Ronald Reagan taught us that you've got to defend freedom, and so did Margaret Thatcher, and they were very successful. And the fundamental problem with giving way to Putin in Ukraine is that he'd come back for more.
I think what people at home would be wondering is how you can reconcile that with support for Donald Trump and write things like, for example, a Trump presidency could be just what the world needs. I take your point on maybe he won't do exactly what he's saying, but he is certainly not articulating anywhere near what you are. In fact, the things he said often run counter to that.
But that's why I say, go back to what he did and look at, just a couple of other things. You look at Iran, the activities, the often malign activities, or destabilizing activities of Iran in the Middle East. Nobody much did anything until suddenly Donald Trump, January 2020, as far as I can remember, he takes out Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC. Look at what he did with Syria. Again, you had a situation in which Barack Obama, Joe Biden, the red lines are famously crossed. Yeah. Assad uses chemical weapons against his own people. Who is the guy who actually pounds Assad's air bases and really punishes him for that? All I'm saying is,
I'm not saying scrutiny of Trump absolves Barack Obama of his foreign policy failings.
What I'm trying to offer you is, and I'm of course, we've all got to be anxious about the situation, and of course, we've got to work to persuade our friends that it's the right thing to do. But I think if you look at the facts, if you look at the history of what he's done in the past, I think there are reasons for optimism, particularly since I don't think any U.S. president, let alone a president who wants to make America great again, is going to want to kick off by basically losing or allowing the West to be humiliated by Vladimir Putin.
The place where Canada comes into this in a lot of these discussions is around the larger issue of defense spending. I had mentioned it earlier, and you know, that is not unique to Donald Trump. Many other former presidents have talked about it as well. They're spending more here.
They are
Mr. Johnson.
1.76.
Yes, yeah, you know, but it's not a plan to get to 2%, and we remain the only ally that doesn't have a plan. When you were Prime Minister, did that matter, and do you think it matters now?
Look, I think this is one of those areas where I can say something about. Because you know it was in the Cardiff summit, the NATO summit in 2014. We all agreed to go to 2%, and I think it's the right thing to do. And I think that we have to face the fact that the world is really more uncertain, more unstable than I've seen it for a long time. I'm still optimistic. I don't think we need to have catastrophes. I think there's every hope for peace. But, you know, the old saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. And I think we need to make sure that we're all in a good position. The UK, we're up to 2.4% now. We'll probably hit 3% on the current programs we have. We'll I think, inevitably hit 3% by 2030. I think that is the right direction of travel. And I'm glad to see Canada coming up.
You recently talked about how Canada should become part of AUKUS, the sort of the triad of a defense alliance between the US, the UK, and Australia. Canada was not originally invited. You were a part of that. Why is that?
That was not in any way. Canada is, look, I think Canada is a massively valued and important NATO partner, G7 partner, and I tell you something, I'm a conservative, but Canada was massively robust at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. I mean, you know, maybe there were some others who weren't quite so steady on parade. Canada was fantastic, okay? You know, when it comes to AUKUS, it'd be clear this was a deal that was done basically because of the Australian need for a different type of submarine. That was the history of it. I think, and obviously it's a matter for Canada, but I think it would be a good thing if Canada joined that as well. And
it's not your view, though, that it was a slight in any way? Or
no, because it was literally because, I mean, you will remember what happened. It wasn't Canada that was cheesed off. Canada was fine. It was the plaster came off the ceiling in the Elysee Palace, because if you remember, it was the Australians were going to do the submarine deal with the French, and then because they were wrong type of submarines. Basically, they were too noisy. They were diesel submarines. They wanted a different type of propulsion system, so they came to us, and we had to go to the Americans because of our nuclear agreements with the Americans. So it arose in a very unique way. There was no intention to exclude anybody.
I just have a few minutes, and I know your time is very limited. I wanted to ask about one other significant topic here in Canada, and that's around climate change. And in particular, your commitment to net zero targets against the backdrop of an affordability crisis. That is literally the nexus of political debate in this country day in and day out. Is it possible, in your view, to remain committed to those targets and still navigate a cost of living? Like, is there any way to do it without it costing more?
No. So here's the thing. The way for conservatives to try to explain net zero to people, it's about jobs, it's about technology, it's about getting the technological solutions to tackle climate change, right? We're not climate change deniers. What we're saying is we think that you should focus on brilliant new technology. We don't want to stop people. We don't want to choke off economic growth. We don't want hair shirt policies. We're not into, you know, pointless tree hugging. You know, we love trees, but whatever. We're sensible. I think when you look at the cost of living crisis, there's a slightly different issue. And in my country, and I think a bit in Canada as well, the whole net zero thing, the anger about net zero is being driven by a general sense that people are spending far too much on their household outgoings. And housing is really a big part of that. And I think in the UK and possibly also in Canada, we need to fix that problem. And if, you know,
do you think it threatens support for those targets?
You talk about. My impression is that the voters, who are very wise, continue to care deeply about the environment, and they want solutions that are going to be cost effective. So yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that, you know, trying to get rid of hydrocarbons overnight just isn't going to happen, and maybe we were going too fast in that respect. That doesn't mean we should drop the ambition. I don't think you just address it by junking your commitment to the environment. In fact, in the long run, you'll get cheaper electricity. You'll reduce your energy costs ultimately if you go green. But it's going to. Where I would agree with some of the anti-net zero brigade is possibly we went at it too fast. We may have to accept that hydrocarbons are with us for a while.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate your time today very much,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Johnson.
Thank you.